Who Gives a Shit
podcast.
So, welcome. Here we go. Second episode of my podcast. I was surprised to see that people actually listen to this, which is cool because, well, pretty pointless if no one would listen to this. Also, I think there is some interesting stuff in there, historically. Not even if you're interested in my band or my music, it's kind of a good view on the scene back then and the things that happened. So actually I was already talking about when we got the contract, first record contract. Let me get back a bit because I didn't really mention some of the things that happened down the road. Well, within this self-quarantine right now, I took the time to start meditating properly. So a lot of old memories come up, which is then kind of interesting to talk about. For example, something I remembered is it was before we had the contracts. At some point between like the first and second demo, I mentioned that we recorded the demo with Richard, and then got some other people on board. We had a bass player. We had the girl who was initially brought into the band to play the violin, but she played the flute and guitars and sang. So she was actually the first female singer for some background vocals. So at some point we were like 6 people on stage, and we played the clubs around and even in other countries. We got an invitation to play in Slovakia. And there, during one of our shows, we kind of got in contact and got to know some guys from Germany, basically. They were, I mean, it was a time before the internet, so I can't really say how famous they were, but they were well-known names. There were, back then there was the Zillow magazine, which was the go-to place for everything alternative. They also had their small portion of goth stuff. It was kind of the first public outlet in the German market or music industry where you could find something about it, where you feel like there is something going on. And they have this compilation, like, I don't know, once a year or twice a year, I can't remember, but they had like the German Mystic sound sampler, and if you managed to get your band on there, you were basically a big name and you're one of the cool bands. So it happened that we played together with 2 well-known bands. One was called Marquee Moon, and the other one was Forthcoming Fire. The thing about Forthcoming Fire is, like, now there's a lot of controversy about the singer JK, because they were a pretty straightforward, like, gothic rock band back then, and they had a couple of hits, and it's really nice. Now there's, like I said, some controversy because afterwards the singer drifted a bit off into another field, and I don't even know what it's called. Is it neofolk or is it something? But he was not allowed to play at the Riff Gothic Treffen because of his let's say use of Nazi imagery. So he's a persona non grata now, which is a shame because he was a nice guy. He has an amazing voice, good looking fella. I spoke to him on the phone a couple of times. So yeah, and how we got to know them back then is when we played with them in Slovakia, and they mentioned that there was another band supposed to be their support, but they got stuck somewhere in the Alps. I think, I can't even remember if it was winter or if it was back then still when there was no Schengen, and it was a possibility that the customs agents like held you up on the border or something. It was an Italian band. I remember the name. To be honest, I have never heard any of their songs. I think they were called Wasteland. So they weren't able to come to Vienna. Because the day after or 2 days after, but shortly after, they were scheduled to play in Vienna. And like I said, if you were in Vienna, you couldn't expect a lot of support from Vienna. So we didn't really get booked unless we booked the show ourselves, kind of. So they told us, like, hey, there's this opening slot. We're missing the support band. Why don't you guys play together in Vienna? So then we showed up there then. Hi, we're stepping in for Wasteland. And it turned out to be a really nice show. So, and also for them, it was nice to give us the support that way. I mean, we met later on in Germany at the Silla Festival that this, like, I haven't spoken to them probably in 20 years, but we had a nice kind of like, yeah, acquaintance. And I still remember the show was pretty cool because the Marquee Moon they did at the time, they did a cover version of Sisters of Mercy Vision thing, but the way they did it, they did an acoustic cover. So, and I remember when all the bands were done and the mood was really cool. It was a place called Rock Inn. It was a kind of famous rock club or venue for concerts in Vienna. Um, well, it's been closed down for decades now, but it was a good address. Like if you played there, it's cool to play there. It was one of the places you would want to play. So, like I said, and the atmosphere was really good, and the audience was good. So at the end of the show, they were coming backstage and said like, "Well, the people still want more. Let's do it." And then we brought all the bands on stage. So it was I think it was me and Ashley. It was some guys from Forthcoming Fire and some guys from Marquee Moon, and together we did like a very long, very strange version of Vision thing, and I think it ended up with Ashley on my shoulders and complete like madness. Unfortunately, it was a time before people had like cameras on their phones, so there are no records of this show, but it was a really nice experience back then. Yeah, and also, I mean, we had a couple of. We always like before we had the contract. Obviously, we tried to matter. We tried to get our name out, our band name out. I remember when we were kind of privately going to festivals in Germany. So meeting guys, having a couple of words with it was like Mozart from Umberto back then, or some guys at Monaco from the Extra. He had like a online shop for goth fashion, um, and he was in a band himself. It was in Dorsetshire. They had a club hit. So speaking to him and always trying to get the kind of the name out and trying to get gigs or trying to get some recognition in a way. I also remember at some point, like I said, Richard had another band and they were doing like medieval stuff. So I think someone close to Mozart from Umetimago, they had also a compilation and he got one song on that. So I think when he opened the place called Kulturruine in Karlsruhe, based on that, Richard got an invitation. So we were all kind of packing, getting in our car, going there, and seeing what's what, and trying to be present and trying to get to know people. At the same time, being like much too awkward, much too shy to really properly talk to anyone. I can't really remember about anything about that trip other than I don't want to point out names, but let's say some of us or one of us tried to kind of smuggle drugs across the border. And like I said, it was still the time when you were being checked. There were no open borders. There was kind of police control every car, which would have been a problem later on, because I remember when we were going to the studio in Switzerland, we were going back and forth all the time, and they were pulling us out every time. We've been profiled by the customs guys or the border police or whatever it's called in Switzerland every fucking time. It was ridiculous, just based on our outfits, and even we said like why it's us. It's like, well, experience shows, but if you look like that, you kind of yeah whatever. Yeah, I mean, really tough shit, like getting undressed and stuff. And I remember once they kind of pulled apart my car. So when I drove back, then the hood wasn't closing properly, and it opened up on the highway, and I was driving really fast. So I mean, I could have died back then, but luckily, quick reflexes and pulled over and fixed the hood with duct tape for the next like 500 kilometers. That was good fun. Yeah, but later on, like getting in and out of Switzerland was always a big deal, and let's say someone close to the record company then kind of revealed why that was. He said, well, somehow like drugs are more expensive or cheaper in Switzerland, I can remember. So he would have his girlfriend smuggle stuff inside her. Yeah, you know where. Exactly. Yeah, so yeah, but like I said, always being profiled basically. And that said, and I also wanted to talk bit about like I mentioned that I didn't get any support, which sounds like a sob story, but I always had some kind of resentment seeing the people around me having a lot of support. Um, I mean, we were thinking back now, really like I was really hardcore. I mean, and there comes this resentment if you're like so true and whatnot, and you live your life like full lifestyle, full everything. I mean, I had like my entire place was black. I blackened out the windows. I had some real skulls and real bones, and you know the real thing, all that. But living in really like really alternative lifestyle, and then really hard getting money. I didn't, like I said, no financial support from anywhere, and there were instances when we were going to like visit the record company, um, basically with the last cash we had, I barely made it with a gas running out when we arrived there. I mean, there were instances where when we were rolling, the car was rolling out when we were going into the gas station, always short on cash, always struggling, and visiting like later on the record company, kind of, well, can you give us money so we can get back home because we don't have any money. So that was kind of a daily thing for us back then. And then seeing other bands who became more successful by being able to pay and buy themselves the fame and everything. That there's a lot of bitterness from my side coming from there, because I mean, you probably wouldn't notice this as a fan, but a majority of the bands that got really big got big because they had some like support from the family, some connections, money, all those sort of things. This rags to riches thing is not really, is rarely working out, because if you can't even go to visit a record company, or let's say a booking agency asked us to send some stuff over and then told us basically, yeah, I've got school bands who have a better budget and a better promo package than you have. And that happened. That's a quote. What can you do? But even before that, I don't know where I took the balls for all the stuff we did. I remember a lot of times when we were driving to the festivals. I mean, there were times when we didn't have tickets, so we were either trying to sneak in a way, or like beg for money, like just stand there like asking people, hey, can you give me a bit of money? And then at some point being able to go to the festival or something like that. It happened a couple of times. I mean, we didn't have a place to sleep. I remember when we were going with together, and also some the times when Ashley was with us, like going to Germany to a big festival, driving 12 hours or something from Austria, and then being there like, okay, cool, we're here now, but where are we gonna stay? We had no tent, we had no place. Ever sometimes we slept in the car or even on the floor. These things happen. Like, we had no plan, basically. I was going somewhere, no money, no plan, just a lot of attitude. I mean, we would be all over Instagram with drama today. But I mean, I'm happy seeing all the kids blurting out the wisdom all over Instagram. I'm happy that there's no record of some of the things we did. So that's also why it was so important for us to find a record company at a time when things still were different. I mean, these days it's really quite impossible to find something, but back then it was kind of, we in some way got together the demo, and it was basically because of Richard had the equipment. So the equipment came with him and the experience. So we were able to put together a demo tape, and it comes because from obviously his family background. I mean, his sister was in his band as well, and the parents were living in a pretty upper class apartment. I think they were kind of famous artists. I'm sure there are books from his father about his art or something. I can't exactly remember. But yeah, that's how we got in, and then we were at the record company, and like I said in the last episode, they had the money, so they paid the studio. This is something that hadn't happened for us in quite some time, because now we have to pay everything up front and then maybe see what happens later on. But back then, we were really lucky with the video and everything. It all got paid. So what we just did is we delivered our art and the record company paid for the studio, the production of the CD, and all that. And even on top of that, gave us money, obviously, for gas and for the music video we did. Yeah, and other stuff. I mean, even later, jumping ahead a bit but even later when we did the compilation, because obviously at some point, I'm gonna talk about this later, we left the first record company to kind of improve our status by going to a record company that had more prestige in my eyes, at least. And even then, when we re-released the first album and did the Tragic Years compilation, we got paid up front. We said like, okay, give us that amount of money for the record, and we got it up front. And with this money we got back then, we bought the equipment to record the All Right Let's Rock album in my apartment. I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I remember, like, when I say in my apartment, it was the apartment in Vienna. Like, we had the neighbors knocking at 2 a.m. because we're recording the vocal lines, and I was screaming and yelling into the microphone in my apartment. And the neighbors are like, we had a pretty cool neighbor living like in the floor below. I think she was a journalist, and she was like, yeah, I get it, I love it, but come on, it's 2 a.m. and I have stuff to do tomorrow, so please cut it out. So yeah, that was cool. And I still remember the way we did it. We were not limited. I mean, now, or like, quite understandable, but if you go to a studio right now, most studios are pretty much like office jobs, like 9 to 5, and at 5 they're like, okay, that's it for today. But recording it in the basically sanctuary of your apartment gave us the freedom, obviously, to go with the flow, with the creativity struck, especially on the All Right Let's Rock records, which I think might be the least favorite record for most of our fans. We were recording or writing like for 24 hours. I can remember when Phil back then was in the apartment, and all the shops were closed, and I think we went to the gas station at like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. in the morning to get like breakfast and then continue with the record. So I always like to have something different on every record. So there's a kind of a story behind it, and it's not too sterile. Because something else I don't like is there's this saying, kind of, Zen mind is beginner's mind. And I think there's a lot of truth and raw energy in the kind of beginner's mind if you try something from the heart and you're not becoming too much of an expert in a way. I mean, I compare it with a painter. Either you kind of paint a good picture, you make art, or you're a painter who kind of paints the walls. And in my experience, a lot of especially guitar players, if they get too much into it, they kind of lose the soul and the spirit of it. They become like handyman. There's a handyman who can play things off a note sheet, kind of, but not from the heart. And this is something I've experienced a lot of times. I mean, I cannot play the guitar well, like maybe at all, but I had times in studios when I had kind of guys who studied jazz, who later on became really successful musicians. I mean, I worked with people who have their columns in music magazines and things like that, but still at some point grasp the soul and the groove of something because it came from the heart and not from the note paper. I don't know if that makes sense. So in my opinion, and also this idea, if you're too much into kind of get the industry blindness, kind of, in a way, if you're too much in the guitar scene or this scene or that scene, you always kind of, you need to buy this, you need to study that, you need to be perfect, you need to buy the most expensive equipment. But then if you look at, I mean, blues artists with their completely fucked up, damaged guitars, and they played from the heart and it sounds great. Or also, if you look at, like, now you can study guitars, play like Jimi Hendrix or something, but it's someone who taught himself how to play the guitar. So for me, it's kind of really weird. I mean, some things cannot be taught, in a way. Obviously, you need to practice. You need to practice, and needs to come from the heart. But some things you cannot be taught. You cannot be taught to be, I don't know, really a creative person. Well, at least in my opinion. And also, if you look at, I've seen an interview with Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, where he's talked about his fucked up guitar, who was really like a piece of shit, but he made the best out of what he had. So his style was determined by the way this guitar could perform, and he was creating his style around it. And I really like this idea of not like you have to study this, like you have to go to school, you have to study jazz, you have to use the $3,000 guitar because you will like then only then you will achieve something or something. That's ridiculous in my mind. So I always approached it like that, maybe out of necessity, but I still stand by it after all these years that there are. I mean, it also depends on the music. Like I said, I've always been interested in metal in a way of being hard and having drive. You know, like guitars being really massive and in your face. But I don't like the too technical metal when basically the way it's being played is just for other guitar players to show them how good you are. I mean that has everything has its place, but it's just not for me. And I had a hard time working with people with that mindset, because less is often more, I think. So going back again a bit to the first record, like I said, the first time we did all in the first take, but at this time it already kind of started crumbling because with my back then undiagnosed ADHD, I was already one step ahead, and my head was somewhere else already. And I mean, at this age, you're being reckless. You don't really care about other people's feelings. So Ashley was in the band, but like I said, he was more on the Cure side and things like that. So when I got to meet Arthur, who was kind of looking the way I wanted people in my band to look, and also musically, he was basically exactly there. So I got him in the band without discussing it with other people. So obviously for Ashley, it was then kind of a, now we are two guitar players and it's a competition, and I'm sure he was kind of hurt on some level. So it was about the same time when he then starting doing his own stuff with Whispers and Shadow, with this, I think it started with his then girlfriend. So yeah, at the time we were starting recording the album, it was already kind of it was no longer the band we started off with as a band, which for me obviously took some time to get used to being a band, because it was always my idea, and I mean, quite frankly, everyone had to fall in line a bit. I'm still not too open when it comes to having my opinions challenged in a way, because at least, I mean, there always needs to be someone with a clear idea. That's something I noticed later on working, where you want to give more to other guys, like, hey, you write a song, you come up with an idea, but not everyone is like that. So later on, sounds like an excuse, but later on I kind of learned that it needs to have someone who kind of shows the direction you want to go, and within these boundaries maybe then you can take suggestions. Not to say that Ashley wasn't a fit. It was just me who has then moved on already to something else, and that's basically when we kind of started to drift apart. I mean, it's the classical conflict of interest, or we have moved on artistically situation. So at the time when we were at the recording studio, it was already, there was one day when Ashley was coming in, the next day when Arthur was coming in, and then Richard was coming in, but he didn't even want to come or something. It was already I mean, you see it in the music video. At this point, Richard was no longer interested in being a part of the band. He was not available for the video. He maybe also saw himself just as a kind of a guest musician and not part of the band. Ashley is also not in the video, so it gives a clear indication of kind of what happened during the process of the album recording, with then Arthur becoming kind of the driving force musically after me, because like I said, we were pretty much on the same wavelength. When we met in a club in Vienna, we discussed the music, and he was young. He was extremely young. I think he was 16 back then, so he wouldn't even have been allowed to travel without the permission of his parents. So it was kind of a really, really interesting and super strange situation, which kind of fit the band really well, because it was always kind of chaos and weirdness surrounding everything we did. Yeah, so and afterwards, I mean, like I said, it started with the interviews, and it started with recognition in a way, and we went right back to the studio and to record the EP, the Unfreiwillig Abstrakt. The keyboard and everything, the programming was still being done by Richard. Guitars were written by Arthur and me, but there was no more Ashley at this point. It was really shortly before Richard then left as well, and afterwards it was just the three of us. And with three of us, kind of basically address the elephant in the room. In the first demo and also on the album, there was no place for female vocals in a way. So it kind of happened and I'm not proud of how it happened. It was kind of, whoever knew Selene knows that she has a bit of a well, she's not the easiest person, let's put it like that. It was weakness on my part, so the reason why I got her in the band is kind of to not make her jealous of what I'm doing when I go on concerts or something, so make her part of it, to kind of, she feels like she's part of it and not feels kind of threatened or left out. So initially she was just doing the keyboard parts, a bit of, playing, pressing play for the drum computer and things like that. On the first album there wasn't much to do. On the demo it was done by the girl we used to have. Her name is Maria. She, interestingly enough, she was in a band later on called Vanitas, quite a popular Austrian, I think, gothic metal band. And later on, their drummer, the drummer they used to have, became our live drummer much later. But it just serves to show how small Austria is actually. So with her being involved and her being a difficult person, it also contributed to other people leaving, because she didn't really get along well with a lot of people. This is something that continues later on. Her and Arthur were arguing all the time. They hated each other. And I remember there were situations later on when we went on stage, and the last things we said to each other before we went on stage is kind of a shut the fuck up, fuck off, and things like that. And then we went on stage. So we had kind of a really negative energy within the band at this point, and which really made it hard for other people coming into the band and staying into the band. So for quite some time we worked with ever-changing musicians. But I'm already jumping ahead. I'm gonna stop here, and if this is still interesting, I will continue with the second album and everything in the next episode.